Have you ever finished an entire day without really understanding where your energy went? Not physical energy, mental energy. You wake up tired. You scroll for a while. You answer messages. You try to focus. You switch between tabs. You think about things you haven't finished. You remember something awkward from 3 years ago. You check your phone again. You try to relax, but even relaxing feels exhausting. And by the end of the day, your brain feels heavy. Not because you worked too hard, but because your mind never truly rested. A lot of people think mental exhaustion only happens to people with stressful jobs, or people going through major life problems. But lately, even ordinary days can feel emotionally overwhelming. And the strange part is, most people can't explain why. They say things like, "I'm tired," all the time. "I can't focus anymore." Everything feels mentally loud. "I used to have motivation." "I don't even know what's wrong with me." Maybe you've said those things too. Because this kind of exhaustion is difficult to describe. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just feels like your brain is slowly losing color. You still function. You still go through your routine. You still reply to people. You still do what needs to be done. But inside, you feel emotionally worn down. And the hidden reason behind that feeling may not be what you think. It's not just stress. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's something much quieter. Something most people never notice. Your brain was never designed to carry this much unfinished, emotional weight every single day. Modern life keeps your mind constantly open, constantly alert, constantly processing. And eventually, your nervous system stops feeling safe enough to truly rest. That's why even small things feel exhausting now. Not because you're incapable, but because your mind has been overloaded for too long. And the scary part is, this kind of exhaustion builds slowly. Most people don't realize it's happening until they suddenly feel disconnected from themselves. You stop enjoying things. You lose curiosity. You avoid conversations. You become emotionally numb. Not because you stopped caring, but because your brain started protecting itself. And today, we're going to talk about the hidden reasons this happens. Not in a cold scientific way, not in a motivational just think positive way, but in a real human way. Because chances are, you're not broken. You're just mentally overloaded in ways nobody taught you to recognize. One of the biggest reasons people feel mentally drained all the time is something called invisible attention fatigue, and almost nobody talks about it. Years ago, your attention had natural limits. You focused on one thing, then another, then your brain rested. But now, your attention is being pulled in dozens of directions every hour. Notifications, news, messages, videos, emails, social media, background noise, constant information. Even when you're resting, your brain is still consuming. And every tiny piece of information asks your brain one silent question. Should I care about this? Most people don't realize how exhausting that question becomes. Because your brain keeps making thousands of micro decisions all day. Should I reply? Should I open this? Should I worry about this? Should I compare myself? Should I remember this? Should I ignore this? Little by little, your mental energy gets scattered, and scattered attention creates emotional exhaustion. That's why many people feel strangely tired after scrolling for hours, even though they technically did nothing. Because mentally, your brain never stopped working. It kept processing emotions, comparisons, information, tension, noise. Your mind stayed active the entire time. And eventually, the brain reaches a point where it starts craving silence, but no longer remembers how to slow down. That's why some people feel uncomfortable in quiet moments now. The silence feels unfamiliar, so they reach for stimulation again. Another video, another scroll, another distraction. Not because they enjoy it, but because the brain has become dependent on constant input. And over time, constant input creates constant exhaustion. But attention fatigue is only part of the story. Another hidden reason you feel mentally drained all the time is emotional background stress. This is one of the most overlooked forms of exhaustion in modern life. Because background stress doesn't always feel intense. It's subtle, quiet, persistent. It's the feeling of carrying unresolved tension all day without realizing it. Maybe it's financial pressure. Maybe it's uncertainty about your future. Maybe it's emotional loneliness. Maybe it's pressure to succeed. Maybe it's the feeling that you're falling behind. Even when you're not actively thinking about these things, your nervous system still feels them. That's important to understand. Your brain doesn't only respond to what you consciously think about. It also responds to what your body quietly believes. And many people today are living in low-level survival mode without noticing. Not extreme survival, but emotional survival. Always preparing, always worrying, always anticipating, always mentally bracing for something. When this happens for long periods of time, your body stops fully relaxing. Even during rest, you can sit on the couch for hours and still feel exhausted, because exhaustion is no longer physical. It's neurological. Your nervous system is tired, and nervous system exhaustion feels very different from normal tiredness. It can feel like brain fog, emotional numbness, difficulty concentrating, feeling detached from life, loss of motivation, difficulty making simple decisions, feeling overwhelmed by small tasks. Sometimes people blame themselves for this. They think, why am I so lazy lately? Why can't I focus anymore? Why does everything feel harder than before? But often, your brain isn't failing. It's overloaded. There's a difference. An overloaded mind starts conserving energy. That's why simple things suddenly feel emotionally heavy. Replying to messages, making plans, cleaning your room, answering emails, even choosing what to eat. Your brain begins treating ordinary tasks like threats. Not because the tasks are dangerous, but because your mental battery has been drained for too long. And unfortunately, modern culture often makes this worse, because we live in a world that constantly pressures people to optimize themselves. Be productive, be successful, wake up early, work harder, improve yourself, stay disciplined, keep going. But very few people are taught how to emotionally recover. And recovery is not the same as distraction. That's another hidden reason people stay mentally exhausted. Many people think they're resting, when they're actually just distracting themselves. There's a difference between calming the brain and numbing it. Scrolling for hours may distract you. Binge watching may distract you. Constant stimulation may distract you. But distraction is not true recovery. Because true recovery requires something modern life rarely gives us anymore. Mental stillness. A moment where your brain is not performing, not comparing, not consuming, not reacting, just existing. And for many people, that kind of stillness feels impossible now because their inner world has become too noisy. There's another hidden reason mental exhaustion has become so common. People are carrying too many emotional tabs open at once. Think about your mind like a computer. When too many tabs are open, everything slows down. Even if you're not actively using those tabs, they still consume energy in the background. Humans work the same way. Unfinished conversations, unresolved emotions, old regrets, future worries, social pressure, self-doubt, hidden anxiety. All of these stay active inside the mind. And eventually, your emotional bandwidth becomes overloaded. That's why some people feel exhausted before the day even begins. Because their brain never truly closed yesterday. The thoughts kept running overnight. The tension stayed inside the body. The nervous system stayed alert. And slowly, mental exhaustion becomes your normal state. One of the saddest parts about modern burnout is that many people don't even realize how emotionally disconnected they've become. They still laugh sometimes. They still go to work. They still post online. But internally, they feel distant from themselves, like they're surviving life instead of experiencing it. And usually this doesn't happen because of one big traumatic moment. It happens through small daily overloads repeated for years. Tiny stress, tiny distractions, tiny emotional suppressions, tiny pressures, tiny comparisons, tiny anxieties. Individually, they seem harmless, but together, they slowly exhaust the human mind. And unfortunately, Many people respond to this exhaustion by becoming harder on themselves. They force themselves to push more, work more, ignore their emotions, stay busy. But constantly overriding your mental exhaustion doesn't heal it. It only teaches your nervous system that rest is unsafe. Eventually, the body starts fighting back. That's when people experience emotional shutdown. Not dramatic collapse, just emotional flatness. Nothing feels exciting anymore. Conversations feel draining. Dreams feel distant. Everything starts feeling emotionally gray. And this scares people because deep down, they remember what it felt like to feel alive, to feel curious, to feel emotionally present, to feel mentally clear. But now, their mind feels constantly crowded. And sometimes the hidden reason is not only external pressure. Sometimes it's emotional suppression. A lot of people are mentally exhausted because they spend all day hiding how they truly feel. They pretend they're okay. They suppress frustration. They avoid conflict. They stay emotionally polite. But suppressed emotions do not disappear. They stay inside the nervous system. And carrying emotions you never process is mentally exhausting, especially sadness, especially resentment, especially loneliness. Many people are carrying emotional pain they never gave themselves permission to acknowledge. So instead, the pain transforms into fatigue. This is why emotional exhaustion often feels physical. Heavy body, heavy mind, heavy thoughts, because your nervous system and your emotions are deeply connected. And when emotional tension becomes chronic, your body starts asking for rest in different ways. Another hidden cause of mental exhaustion is the feeling that your life never truly pauses. Modern life erased many natural boundaries. Work follows people home. Messages arrive all day. Information never stops. The internet never sleeps. Your brain rarely receives a clear signal that says, "You are safe now. You can stop." And humans need that signal more than they realize. Without psychological closure, the brain stays partially alert. That low-level alertness slowly drains mental energy. That's why some people feel guilty while resting, because their brain has been conditioned to associate stillness with falling behind. So even during breaks, the mind stays active, thinking, planning, comparing, worrying. And over time, people forget what deep rest actually feels like. Not entertainment, not distraction, real rest. The kind where your nervous system finally unclenches. The kind where your thoughts stop racing. The kind where your body no longer feels emotionally guarded. Many people haven't experienced that feeling in years. And maybe that's why so many people quietly feel empty lately. Not because they're weak, not because they're failures, but because their mind has been carrying too much for too long. There's also something else happening in modern life that contributes to mental exhaustion. People no longer have enough emotional processing space. Humans were never meant to absorb endless information without reflection. But today people consume emotions all day. Bad news, other people's opinions, online arguments, fear, comparison, pressure, entertainment, noise. And before the brain can emotionally process any of it, more information arrives. That constant emotional intake overwhelms the nervous system, and eventually, your inner world becomes crowded. That's why some people suddenly break down emotionally over something small. It's rarely about the small thing. It's accumulated overload, a nervous system carrying too much for too long. And perhaps one of the biggest hidden reasons people feel mentally drained all the time is that they've lost meaningful connection with themselves. Many people spend their entire day reacting to notifications, reacting to expectations, reacting to work, reacting to other people. But they rarely stop long enough to ask themselves, how do I actually feel? And when humans disconnect from themselves for too long, life starts feeling emotionally hollow. You continue functioning, but you stop feeling internally grounded. And without internal grounding, the world becomes mentally overwhelming. Because everything outside of you starts controlling your emotional state. That's why mental exhaustion is not always solved by productivity hacks. Sometimes the real solution is learning how to feel safe inside your own mind again, learning how to slow down, learning how to process emotions, learning how to create moments of psychological silence. And no, this doesn't mean escaping life. It means rebuilding your relationship with your nervous system, because the human brain cannot remain in constant stimulation forever. Eventually, it asks for recovery. And if recovery never comes, mental exhaustion slowly turns into emotional detachment. That's the stage where people start saying, "I don't feel like myself anymore." And honestly, that feeling is becoming incredibly common. Not because humans are becoming weaker, but because modern life is becoming mentally heavier. The human brain evolved for moments of stimulation, followed by recovery. But modern life replaced recovery with endless input, and the nervous system is paying the price. So what can you actually do about this? The answer is probably gentler than you expect. Most mentally exhausted people do not need more pressure. They need more recovery. Real recovery, not just sleep. Not just entertainment. Mental recovery. Emotional recovery. Nervous system recovery. Sometimes healing starts with reducing noise. Less constant stimulation. Less unnecessary comparison. Less emotional overload. Sometimes healing starts with giving your brain space to breathe again. Moments without your phone. Moments without input. Moments where you allow yourself to exist without performing. And yes, at first this can feel uncomfortable, because overstimulated minds become addicted to noise. But slowly, the nervous system begins remembering what calm feels like. And that changes everything. Another important step is emotional honesty. A lot of mental exhaustion comes from carrying emotions in silence, pretending, suppressing, avoiding. But emotions that are ignored do not disappear. They stay stored inside the body. Sometimes what the mind truly needs is acknowledgement, not perfection, not productivity, just honesty. I'm overwhelmed. I'm emotionally tired. We've been carrying too much alone. Those kinds of truths matter, because healing often begins the moment you stop fighting your own exhaustion. And maybe this is important to hear. You are not failing because you feel mentally drained. You are responding normally to an environment that constantly overloads the human mind. Your exhaustion makes sense, especially if you've been surviving emotionally for a long time. Especially if your brain never truly gets silence. Especially if you've been carrying invisible stress every day. Many people think they need to become stronger, but sometimes what they really need is permission to slow down. Permission to stop treating themselves like machines, because humans are not designed for non-stop emotional stimulation. We need pauses. We need reflection. We need emotional safety. We need rest that actually restores us. And maybe that's the hidden truth behind why so many people feel mentally drained all the time. Their mind hasn't had a real moment of peace in years. Not true peace, not the absence of work, but the absence of inner pressure, the absence of emotional noise, the absence of constant mental survival. So if your mind has been feeling exhausted lately, if everything feels emotionally heavy, if your brain feels crowded all the time, maybe this isn't laziness. Maybe this isn't weakness. Maybe your nervous system is simply asking for something modern life forgot how to give. Stillness, space, recovery. And maybe the most powerful thing you can do right now is stop blaming yourself for being tired, because exhausted minds do not need shame. They need care. They need slowness. They need room to breathe again. And little by little, when the nervous system finally feels safe enough to rest, clarity starts returning. Energy slowly comes back. The world feels lighter again, not overnight, but gradually, like a brain finally emerging from emotional noise. And maybe that's the beginning of feeling like yourself again.